So modernization, everybody loves modernization, going to the new stuff. So what is modernization? Well, it's typically we all take all of our existing equipment that has been there for quite a long time, and has been modified every now and then, or had little failures here and there, and we're trying to mitigate risk of downtime, trying to upgrade to newer, faster equipment. Whatever the reason being that we're doing this modernization, it's there. Now, as we go to look at some of these pretty pictures here, you can see some of the horror cases that we have out there, and I wouldn't be surprised if half y'all have some of this kind of stuff in your plant, because it's pretty common, is, no wire duct covers, anything like that. So sometimes just getting in there trying to figure out how to modernize can be one of the biggest problems. It's just an unsurmountable task. So, with Rockwell, we're talking about some of the solutions we've got on top of just hardware. So as we go on today.
How many people have used the phrase, if it's not broken, don't fix it? Oh, you are all lying.
I was about to say, everybody in his room. Yeah. So, and that's one of the places where we typically paint ourselves into a corner. If it works fine, don't fix it, but we wait until something's completely obsolete to find out that we need a replacement because it worked for forever. So that's one of the pieces that we try to mitigate and just bring you up to speed on where things are at currently in their life cycle. So talking about life cycle and time, we've got an awful lot of equipment that has been out there for a very long time. I still know that there are a few PLC2s floating around in town, but we have PLC3s, PLC5s, all sorts of older equipment out there, and all of those have been around for quite a long time. Now, PLC5 is something that we recently obsoleted, and it wasn't because we didn't want to support it going forward. It wasn't really anything to do with that. It was physically we couldn't get the stuff to make them. We were running out of equipment to make the systems, and so that was really kind of the limiting factor on this. So it wasn't really based on us being like, oh yeah, we want you to move to something new. It was physically we couldn't get the stuff. So moving on to some of the other systems, you've got the SLCs, which are still supported. You can still use them, buy them. There's a couple of part numbers in there that we've obsoleted over the years, but for the most part, we've gone through and made everything Rojas compliant. So we're going to continue to make the stuff for a period of time. Now, those came out in in 89. So they've been out for a while. ControlLogix has been out since 98. And that's still our flagship model going forward. And one of the things to look at is this latest revision is we just came out with the L8 version, which is now our 5th generation of the controllers for this platform. But we're keeping it alive and moving forward. And that was from lessons learned from the previous platforms, is how do you make a system that you can keep? So, we're 20 years into the system and we're not even considering making a new replacement for it. We just keep replacing modules and upgrading controllers.
So from at least looking at it from the large controller side of it, we've only had 3 major chassis changes since the last, 1986. The PLC5 selects ControlLogix has been the only changes when it comes to the chassis, not looking at like compact logics on the smaller side. So the same L55 that used to have still works with the same chassis for the L6, the L7, and the L8. We have come out with new chassis designs, but the overall architecture, the I/O, the network adapters, all of them are still there. So if we are able to kind of migrate that over, and it gives us a nice little picture where you don't have to, every single time we come out with a new revision, buy a new hardware. I'm going to tell you to do that anyways, but that doesn't work.
I mean, a lot of those design changes we have on the chassis are literally for things like vibration mitigation on the mounting, and then adding a little bit more ventilation for the new L8 because it's got a pretty strong processor in it and it needs a little bit more thermal dissipation. And we really don't want to put a fan on one of these things. So there's reasons that we make these changes, but they're all backwards compatible when it comes to like chassis and stuff like that. So we have released a few new pieces compact Logix wise. So we have moved around a little bit with a couple different revisions in compact Logix. And we now have our next generation, the 4th generation of the compact Logix out. So as we go to modernize and migrate, we typically do our best to assist where we can. From a Rockwell perspective, we try to get you very easily from one Rockwell platform to the next. We've made tools, hardware, and software to migrate from the PLC5s to control logics, make it trying to minimize your wiring time, your downtime there, and converting software as well. And Rockwell offers additional services for converting software that isn't just our RSV32 product. So converting Wonderware and a couple other platforms, we've got those services through Rockwell. They're not published tools like we've got for converting some of our PLC5 hardware, because those are published and it have nice documentation and we can push out and let anybody use them. These ones are a little more rough around the edges, aren't as complete, but they're good for internal use within Rockwell. So we have those at your disposal. And then we've also been through a couple revisions of HMIs. So our panel view standard, panel view plus, panel view plus 6, panel view plus 7, all different revisions of that platform. And again, tools to migrate from one to the other, manuals to help with part number conversion, as well as manuals to walk you through the software conversion. So with each of these products, again, we try to be as upfront with you as we can about where these things reside in their life cycle. So we have the life cycle stages spelled out here, and typically try to stay in the active range. Active is going to be typically our newer products that don't have something else that's come out after them that is a kind of a better fit going forward. So you stay into that active range, you've got a really good chance your stuff's going to be around for quite a while. You get into that active mature, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be obsoleting that equipment. It does typically mean that there may be a little bit of price increase on some of that stuff because it's getting harder for us to maintain it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going away immediately. So there isn't like an end date when we move something to active mature. So like the SLCs, for instance, are listed typically as active mature. And it's not because those are going away in 2 years. It's because we want you to use the compact logics instead of the SLC moving forward, because the compact logics is going to be around longer. So those are kind of the things that we push and with that active mature. End of life is we try to give as much time as we can. When we say this is the end date, last time buy, the item will go end of life, and it'll actually have a specific date on the one last time you can buy it. After that, it'll fall into discontinued. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't get it repaired. So you may not be able to buy a new one after that discontinuation date, but like PLC5s, you can't go buy a new PLC5 processor right now, but you can still get them repaired. So even when it's discontinued, we still offer repair services.
And just to add on top of what Joe said, our repair exchange services, and this is specifically for the PLC5 because there's so many out there. We get people inquire about new PLC5 cards all the time. We obviously don't have them. Rockwell will not sell you a refurbished PLC5 card. Where I'm going with this is don't throw away your PLC5 defective cards. Use those as for repair exchange. You send Rockwell the old one, they send you a refurbished one. Half the price of generally getting it repaired. And it's also it's a lot faster because generally that can be done in an overnight fashion. I just know a lot of my customers are throwing away PLC5 cards when they go bad. Don't do that because you might need them down the road.
You need to exchange it. There's a 2-year warranty tied with the exchange too, so better than new warranty.
We invited them for a reason. Yeah, so the 2-year warranty on exchange products. So another reason to go that route. But again, that's one of those, if you throw away your existing hardware, it goes bad, you toss it, then you're like, you can't get access to new ones. You're ready to go dumpster diving, so you can go get that one back so you can send it back to Rockwell and have them try to fix it. And typically on some of the more common stuff, they have one on the shelf that's refurbished, ready to go. Some stuff isn't on the shelf and they'll be actually taking your product, taking it apart, figuring out what's wrong with it, reassembling it, remanufacturing it, and sending it back to you. So that's going to dictate the lead time on the individual piece of hardware. So with Rockwell, we have a nice little place on the web where we can do our life cycle status checks. You can go in there, it's a website up there. You can basically type in any product catalog number that you like, and including leaving off pieces. So I could go in there and type 1756 and just that, and hit enter, and it'll pop up everything in that entire list. So all my IO cards, everything is a 1756 series. So control logic series module. Or I can type in a specific module like an L63. Or I can just type in L, and it'll show me all the L55, 5500s, it'll show me the L6s, the L7s, the L8s, it'll show me all of them. So you can see where they're at in their life cycle. In the case of the L6, these have been discontinued since June of last year. So the reason that they're discontinued is that they're out for quite a few years, but it's one of those, we're not gonna keep these around because the L7 is literally a drop-in replacement for it. It's got all the same functionality, it's just twice as fast. So instead of producing both of these very similar modules, we just replace the L6 with the L7. And it will also list a replacement solution. So it includes what you should replace it with.
The only other time that you'll see it where it doesn't give you an actual replacement is when we don't have a one-for-one. And a lot of the times it's either a controller or a panel view has either extra functionality or something similar, where we either combined it. So you'll either see a different part as an option, or you'll see an engineered solution. If you see that and you can't get anything on knowledge base or anything, just let us know. We'll know what the path is. Some of the times you've seen it on the newer controllers. The L6 had a serial port. The L7 has no serial port. So there are options there where all of a sudden we kind of need to get a little tricky on how we do the migration if you specifically needed that. If you didn't need it, then we don't worry about it at all. If not, we'll end up putting a side card that has serial on it.
So we also have a place called the Product Compatibility and Download Center. So if you just go to ab.com, down in the middle of the page is a link right to it. And within here, you can find all of your firmware updates and do comparisons of which software works with which operating system. Because I know that's a hot topic fairly often. And what works with Windows 10, what works with Windows 7, 64-bit, 32-bit. So showing all of those different variances, so that the compare functionality gives you all of that capability of going in there and seeing what works with what. And then and also to the point of what hardware works with what software. And then the downloads gives you basically access to all your firmware, as well as a few release notes and other stuff for different revisions. And any of the free software that we've got, like RS Links, Classic Lite, resides in there as well. And then you have software download by serial number, which is the standard place you go for any of the software that you've purchased. Anything else on that one? So we've also added in, again, trying to make things easy. If you use ProposalWorks, the free Rockwell tool, in there we've added in the lifecycle status in there as well. So we've also, a while back, we added in whether a product was preferred or not, which typically means whether it's going to be stock here or stock with it at the Rockwell factory. And then we've also added in the lifecycle status. So you can very quickly see which products are active, mature, discontinued. Most discontinued products don't stay in ProposalWorks for an extended period of time, maybe about a year, that's about it. But anything that's active and active mature will show up in there. And just to let you know that this is active mature, should I find a different product line to use? Is there something that I should be replacing this with? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going away in 2 years. It doesn't mean it's going away next week. If it's active mature, it could be around for the next 7 years. It just means we've got something newer that you should probably be looking at. So we've also added that into Asset Center. So that's something that we've recently done with the most recent release of Asset Center, is allowing it to, when you add any of your equipment in there, which Asset Center is a tool for going out and pulling your programs out of all your controllers and hosting those programs in a server-based platform. So you can do revision management. So you don't have to go run around and try to figure out who was the last person that downloaded this controller when it fails. Not that our controllers fail, but we understand life happens. So if something happens, nobody's touched this PLC in 5 years. Well, where's the most recent copy of the program? That's what Asset Center is for, is to hold all of that on a server, so it's there, revision managed. But we've also added in this functionality to be able to show you what the status is of the equipment that you have connected. So that just within a very quick glance, you can see, oh, I should probably start looking at migrating this, or make sure I've got a spare. You know, because they're going discontinued, I want to make sure at least I've got a spare, got a backup. We'll worry about migrating later, but I want to make sure I've got a spare.
Yeah, so version 7 introduced the asset inventory, so you can go out and scan your network and add everything into the tree. Version 8 added it, so now you can do the life cycle side of it. For it to be able to be live, it does have to have the network connection up. Most of your asset center systems would not have a live connection up, but you can pull the file from the inventory agent that you pull, bring that in directly into the website on a computer that does have your network, and you'll be able to add that into that PCBC that Joe just talked about, and it'll give you the static file with all the information on it. So just because you can't load it directly in Asset Center for any reason, or you don't have that on the network, you're still able to get the functionality. So just be aware of that part.
So control platforms, you can look at our individual platforms, you can see where they're at generally within their life cycle. A couple of keynotes here recently, I would say would be the Micrologix 1000 and 1500. Those ones have recently gone obsolete, been discontinued. And so we've got some migration paths for those, whether we move to another Micrologix or move to a compact Logix in the case of the 1500, depending on the scaling and the size of it. And you'll see that certain ones, you know, like we've got our control Logix up here at the top, kind of goes all the way across because we have some products like our very old processors that are discontinued. But as the platform goes, the whole platform is very, very active. So we've got a few cards in there that we've had to obsolete over time and made replacements for. So you can kind of see that there's different groups within that. But some of the older stuff, PLC 5s, 3s, 2s, PLC, Automax, all of those are listed as discontinued. The one that we should be keeping an eye on right now, as far as it's not discontinued, but it could be in the next 7 years or so, would be the SLC, because it's in that mostly active mature range. So it's one of those is, we're not going to get rid of it until we absolutely have to. But that's one of those ones that if you're looking at doing a new system, don't use an SLC. Use a compact Logix. If you need to expand your existing SLC system, we can have a discussion on whether it'd be beneficial to migrate while you're expanding it. But at the same time, all the hardware is still readily available to expand it. So, and I talked about this a little bit ago. The L6 series of the control Logix has been obsoleted. So they are now discontinued. But we do have the L7, which is a drop-in replacement for those. So anybody that's been around that we've talked to in the last year or two, we've been talking a little bit about the L8 series of controllers, the next gen series, that fifth edition. Notice that this isn't up here as a suggested replacement, because there's, as per Luis's thing a little bit ago, there's too many little variables that are different with the L8 that make it not a drop-in replacement for an L6. So the L7 definitely is, but the L8 is not. And with the L4 series of the compact Logix, which are you've got the date up there for when they're going to be discontinued. Those ones are, the migration on those is really going to be to the next gen compact Logix, the 5380 series. So that's really going to be the next gen, and that basically, because it allows for multiple Ethernet connections, it more scales directly across for those. I think my next slide, I got one more. I got another slide on that we'll come back to. And I was saying about the Micrologix 1000, typically those we're going to be looking at migrating either to an 1100 or migrating the other direction down to a Micro 800 series. And that's going to be on the migration side. If you're looking at making something new, again, we look at both options there. We do now have a tool for migrating from the Micrologix Logix 500 down to CCW for the Micro 800 series. We do have a tool for that now. And we've added in with the most recent revision of Connected Components Workbench, the ability to make it look more like a Logix 500 platform. So it acts a little bit more something that you're more used to. The CCW is definitely a different environment. compared to our standard Logix 500 and 5000 products. And then the MicroLogix 1500, we've added in we've got the capability of migrating those to compact Logix. If you don't want, if it's a small system and only has like 1 or 2 expansion modules, it could probably scale back the other way to like a MicroLogix 1400. So not a whole lot of programming changes there, because then you're still in the same language, but now you're changing I/O cards. So that's why we typically convert those to compact Logix, just because the I/O cards, the expansion I/O is the same. That break-even point's right around 3 or 4 expansion cards.
Do we have any large MicroLogix users here?
30 or 40.
We probably want to talk after this.
Yeah.
Basically, it's one of those, I think we want to give you a Micro 800 so you can play with it.
I don't know, 15s or 15 minutes.
Well, then you're really screwed up. If you got 1500.
Of course.
There's
That wasn't me, my question is, does compact logic have the serial capabilities?
There's a
The
slide.
reason I'm using them is because of the built-in.
Go back
I
a
really don't want to go to personal.
So we've talked about this in an earlier one, but with the 5380 family of the compact Logix, which is the high performance side, that module just released a couple months ago. That's a serial, it's an ASCII modulus RTU. So you sit that in the chassis, and that's kind of why they're pairing it here, where the L4 is the one where you can actually have the serial port and multiple Ethernet adapters. So the 5380 can support 2 Ethernet IP adapters, and on top of that, you can put this as a sidecar for your connections. The next revision, which will just be a firmware update, will allow the EF1 communication. Right now, it's just ASCII and modulus RTU.
In your case, you could leave your I/O in place. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, with the 1500, if you're using the 1769 I/O, that's why the path there is to just use like an L3 format of the compact Logix. If you don't have a lot of the I/O, or just for any reason it's just more of the processor, then we can look at migrating over to the 5380 without any issues.
All right. So like I was saying before, we've got the MicroLogix to Micro 800 conversion tool. So that utility does exist now. So if you want to play with it, it's free to use because CCW is free. So as I was saying before about the 5380 and some of the capabilities within it, there's a few pieces down here that are still listed as future. So when we start looking at migrating certain systems, or even in the case of the control Logix, the reason I was saying the L8 is not a replacement for an L7 or an L6 is, again, these future items down here at the bottom. Because the solution isn't complete on those yet. So we're working on that, but we're not quite there. So there's certain cases where we may need to have a couple special conversations on which way to migrate the system. So in the case of the control Logix, or in the case of moving from a Micro 1500, we shouldn't really have any issues moving to a 5380. But if we had a system that's using like phase manager in a normal compact Logix, moving to the next gen may be an issue, because that doesn't exist at this point. It is coming. So.
What is a license phase?
License-based protection. So with the next gen controllers, we've added in some additional functionality, 2 different pieces. We've got protection on the code and then protection on the execution of the code. So protection on the code, we have a USB dongle that you can buy that you can tie as a license and give permission, and gives the permissions of what part of your code you're allowed to see. And then with the license-based piece, we've got an SD card that acts as a license key that you can put in the front of your controller and tie the program execution to it, so that if that SD card is removed, the PLC will not go into run mode. So you could make a copy of the program, move it, make an exact duplicate of a system. So from an OEM perspective, somebody could make a duplicate of your system, but it won't run without the license key. And then if you have the software protected as well. They can't duplicate the software either. So now they can't duplicate your intellectual property. So that's what that is there for. So it's taking it one step beyond just passwords and factory talk activation or factory talk security. Word escape. Any other questions before we move on to IO? No? I'm gonna hand this off to Luis.
So, show of hands, who has sub version 20 of Studio 5000? Or at this point, RS Logic 5000? How far down?
14.
So 17, 14, okay. And that probably goes with it's not broke, don't fix it. So version 20 is still our kind of gold release. We're not going away with that. You guys all know pretty much Windows has removed support for XP. So unfortunately, that means we also did. It doesn't mean we no longer support the software that runs on XP, but we can no longer support XP as a platform. So anything that you see going forward with us, Windows XP is no longer on there. Does it still work? Yeah. It just, if you're looking at a migration path, 20 would be kind of the go-to on anything that's what we would call a legacy product. So that, if you had a 14, I'd probably tell you, okay, let's try to get it up if we could. But more than likely, if you're running 14, you're probably on an L5 or L6 or something like that. So we still support everything that's on there. All of the new stuff is going to be version 31. That's kind of our go-to. Redundancy will be out within, or might be out already. I haven't checked. So 31.5 is releasing. There is a rollout for 20. While we don't support XP, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10 support exists for 20, 24, and 30, and 31. So all of that is kind of fair game. And we do have a couple of knowledge-based articles that tell you how to migrate from like an XP platform up to a Windows 10 platform if you ever needed to do anything like that. So from a distributed I/O point of view, and majority of this is all going to be Ethernet based, but we do have some information on how to do migrations on our older style communication platforms. When we're looking at this, a lot of this is going to be kind of standard fare. One thing that you will notice is a month or two ago, we did an update on Flex 5000, which is the newest I/O platform that we have that ties into the L8 and the 5380 platform. This is still active as of right now. So what we're planning on doing with Flex is until the entire family rolls out and everything gets flushed out and the L8 is a replacement for the L7, at that point, we'll start seeing these migrate over to active mature. Up until then, we're looking at least a good 6-7 years of support without having to change anything when it comes to Flex. Mainly because when it comes to a redundant system, a process system, the L7 and the standard Flex is kind of where our mindset is. So what you'll start seeing is at the end of August, that's when we'll see the new release of PX 4.5 that we're talking about. It did get pushed because redundancy got pushed a little bit. Once that shows up, it's still going to show the option of an L7 and a Flex family of processors. So don't worry about that. If you have your Flex, continue on it. If you have a project that's going out 3 years from now, then we'll talk. And that's usually what we'll start seeing.
But, so the LA is just Flex is not the option this year?
Yes, so the L8 and the 5380 compact can use any I/O it wants. The L7 can only use the older platform stuff. So you can't use the 5069 and you can't use the 5094. So anything, if you've seen our marketing and you've seen me make fun of it multiple times, there's a 50 in front of it. So anything new comes out with a 5094, 5069. Those are the compact, and so for more of machine stuff and more of what we would consider process space would be the Flex 5000. You can't use those with an L7. So it's not backward compatible on that side. But if you have an L8 at the top of the system or a 5380, both of those will work with any of the I/O platforms that we need. So at that point, what we'll start seeing is if there's a need for PRP, which is that parallel redundancy side of it, multiple I/O points, because the existing Flex can only do 8 cards, the new Flex can do up to 16. So when we start looking at that, if If you have a simplex process system right now, we can talk about architectures, and it might be beneficial to go the L8 route, which is what kind of Joe was saying is there are some functional benefits of going with an L8, but because of the fact that it doesn't support redundancy yet, it kind of pigeonholes us a lot when it comes to which one are we looking at. So the L7 is still our main process go-to. But if you got a system that doesn't have those limitations that we look at, doesn't require a phase manager and a couple other things, we'll end up looking at it. So, just kind of depends. Point IO is still active. That one is still our junction box-based IO. And as far as Armor Point, everything that's there, any on machine, we're looking at newer designs there. Everything is an Ethernet-based type system. Anybody actually have any of the embedded DIO? Okay, good. Realistically, the best sellers in our market are the Flex. Additionally, the Point IO and the Compact Logix IO. We don't have that on the list here, but essentially anything that's at 1769, if you have a Compact Logix family, that is our main go-to distributed IO because you can put it on a pair with an adapter and put the controller somewhere else. So all of those are still active. We do have the newer products, which is a 1719. That did replace this guy here. So if you were looking at a Flex EX or you needed something with like a gaseous environment, class 1, div 2, zone 1, zone 2, instead of the control net or the device net version that we used to have, it's an Ethernet based version now that has the barriers built in. So that's a 1719 family. So just be aware of that. From an HMI point of view, not from the kind of computer side of it, but just straight up panel views. How many have black bezels? I saw a laugh and a couple of them. How many people still do non-Ethernet to the controllers for the HMIs?
Or even better, who has a CRT for their screen on a PLD? Yeah, I figured it.
I hear you.
So most of you should already be aware of the fact that most of that is already discontinued. So,
Yeah.
it's not for lack of trying on our end. And again, I completely understand with the if it's not broke, don't fix it idea. I did it all the time. So a couple of things that you guys should be aware of. If anybody joined our visualization roadshow a little while ago, you saw some of our newer PanaView offerings, the continuation of the PanaView Plus 7. So PanaView Plus 7, both standard and the performance are our main go-to. So anything you bring to us now, we're going to move you through an Ethernet-based design, whether it's DLR or standard Ethernet. Tie that in. We can do up to a 19-inch screen all the way down to, I think it's a 6-inch. And then anything that pairs from a kind of micro-logics or micro point of view will push you to what's called the PanaView 800. It's the upgraded version of the component style PanaView. So if anybody used those in the past, it's now moved to all Ethernet. It's no longer a serial-based communication. Everything's color. It's a 4-inch, I think up to a 10-inch. So comparably, if you got one controller, it's tied in, smaller machine, kind of an isolated system, that would be our go-to. Class 1, div 2, still gives you the functionality of being able to do a VNC connection in. But if you have the standard, the enhanced, the classic, or even the older plus style, we will heavily try to upgrade you. One thing that I can tell you from a commercial aspect is if you're able to trade in your old equipment, we will be able to give you a discount towards the new stuff. We call it step forward on our end. Okay, so that exists for both the PanaViews and the HMI side, including the controllers. So it's a 1-for-1. You trade in an old controller, I give you discounts on the new controller. You trade in an IO card, I try to get you a discount on the new IO card. So if something like that happens, that would be part of our migration discussion and what the strategy would be, whether it's a 1-year plan, 5-year plan, let alone what we're doing on it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, currently right now, if you have an L6 processor to trade in, we'll give you 15% off an equivalent L7. So as part of the trade-in.
Yep.
So, and that applies for any other equipment that might be discontinued. Those rebates do exist. Just get with one of the specialists when we talk to you about it.
So if we are looking at anything that's third party, shame on you, and you stole my cookie. But if you're looking at anything, just let us know what the cross is. We can tell you what the comparable one. Like I said, the 7 is our go-to. So in most cases, if you bring in a Siemens, a Red Line, anything like that, it's probably going to go to a 7. So we have the standard, which is a 1 controller, so a smaller form factor in most cases. We do only up to a 15-inch screen on that one, but it's only 1 controller connection. That controller can either be Rockwell or it can be third party. So we don't pick. In all of the PanaView 6 and 7s, we have Kepware embedded inside of that. So that's a 30 driver system where we can connect to Modbus, Siemens, and a couple other different things there via OPC. So if that one connection is third party, it will still function. It's just one connection. The performance style, that one goes up to the 19-inch screen. You can do multiple controllers on that one. And again, same thing. It can be either a Rockwell controller or it can be a third party controller. So any of that stuff, we wouldn't need a gateway device. And also, letter of the law, if it's coming through the Rockwell controller first, it's a Rockwell connection. So if there's already a gateway device that exists for the controller side of it, we no longer care if it's coming through Modbus, because all we care about is the Ethernet IP connection on it. So that's another option that we have on that side of it. Standard, on every single one of those, it's got a case-by-case basis, but in most cases, I'm going to push you over to the 7. A couple weeks ago, you heard on the Visualization Roadshow side of it, we do have a new PanaView series called the 5000. If it's a newer system, there's no legacy on that. That's why we kind of did mention it as part of our modernization effort. If it's a newer system, the customer is not really a Rockwell kind of fanboy when it comes to the HMI. That's the route we're going on there because it's a single connection, but it's a completely new style of product. So, but for anything that's legacy migrations, modernization efforts that we're looking at, the 7s will still be our go-to. Now, some of you guys know, but the 7s are only Ethernet based. So if we still have some type of serial DH+, those type of systems, those are when we start getting into like, how do we engineer that side of it? So like I said, some of them may not have a direct replacement on it, but again, same concept. If we're able to bring it into the controller, even if it's a serial connection and we use that little side card that I just showed, at that point to the panel view, it's still Ethernet. So there are ways around that. The only other instances where the 7 would not be the preferred and we push you to the 6 is if it's a hybrid or marine certification. So anything outside of that, the 7s are probably going to be the way to go for us. And then, like I said, anything that you have that be the component level, so those would be the small little scale, dark gray bezel that were tied originally with the micros. We can do those for micrologics, micros, and the small L1, L2, L3 controllers for compact logics. If you just need something essentially cheap and dirty, that's where we would push you. Because that one's not meant to be a bigger system. That one's meant to work directly with that unit. And we'll talk about these guys in a little bit. So as far as on the software side for computer systems, so on the HMI front, we've had RSView32 in the past. That is still an active, mature product. So anybody have RSView32? You got like Yahtzee at this point.
Ask them about how many PLC 3s you might have.
Yeah, I know. Actually, those things are awesome to look at. They're just massive. So from RSView32, the biggest issue that we have is the 32 part. So like I said earlier with the XP, we can no longer support XP. So the chances of us getting a RSView64 is not going to happen. So it will stay RSView32. We can migrate the RSView32 to FactoryTalk SC, which is the native. That's our HMI package that we have for that. It is currently on version 10. We do step forward on that as well. So if you trade in your older licenses for RSView32, we will give you, I think it's about 50% discount on the newer systems. So you do have to give up the licenses. Outside of that, we will help you. The conversion from an RSView32 to FactoryTalk VUSC is practically automatic. Now, same thing that we've talked about in the past when it comes to the controllers. It does not optimize the code. It just migrates everything over. So you can open up an RSView32 application, bring it over directly into SE, and all of your displays, all the tags will get brought over. Does that mean you still have to touch it? More than likely. Because if anything that existed in the older system. If anybody has ever done a migration from a panel view to an SE system, you know you still have to touch it at some point because some of the buttons don't work the same way. There's now a button and things of that nature. So you programmers know what I'm talking about. But it gets you 90% of the way there. So all of that is kind of done for you. It's built into the products and there's no limitation how far back you can go in an RSView 32 as long as you have the application. If you can't get access into your panel view or into the application, I can't help you. Or in most cases, I can help. When it's not ours, we have the ability of being able to grab a Wonderware InTouch system or an iFix system and convert it for you. Same concept. It doesn't get you 100% of the way there. It's not going to optimize anything that's on the Wonderware side. And realistically, if they programmed it with nothing but script, the chances of that getting actually upgraded over to FactoryTalk View SE properly is somewhere in between. So depending on the application, you can give us the application. I'll send it up to my commercial engineering group. Usually within a day or two, you get it back. No charge. So even if you guys are considering it, we can do that for you, send you back the files. I won't charge you. None of us, well, Mike might, but that's a different story. We can do anything from version 6 up to 11. If it's Orchestra, we no longer have that option because they do their objects differently. So if it's still an InTouch system, we'll do the conversion for you. You can get an engineer, whether it's yourself or get one of our guys to do it and then complete it and do the full commissioning on it. We also give you credit. So same idea. You turn in those licenses, we give you a discount towards ours. So again, InTouch or iFix. And it's the standard iFix or the iFix 32. If you have another system, let me know. We might have tools in the background. These are the ones that are easily available to us and we can do a turnaround within a day or two. But we have the option on the Rockwell side to be able to do a lot of different other systems. So there might be something that exists. You can convert older RSView SE systems up to the newer ones. All that happens is it will give you a little splash warning saying this is going to be built or converted into the newer system. Do you want to do that? You say yes. It converts it over to FactoryTalk View SE version 10. The caveat there is you can no longer go the other way. Just like anything else, our Studio 5000 or FactoryTalk SE, if you go up to the latest and greatest, you can no longer go down to the other one, with exception. You can get in there to the XML code, delete the things that you don't need and open it up before. But if you go from a FactoryTalk View version 8 to a version 10 in SE, that application now has to stay in 10. If you're in a panel view world and you're using FactoryTalk View ME, I can be on version 10 and do a compiled code for an older panel view. It could be version 5, it can be version 6, it can be version 7, it doesn't matter. I can convert that and push it in. So from a panel view interface, if you guys are doing anything with that, it's safe to go to the newest version of the machine edition and still compile your existing without having to upgrade your firmware. It just on the computer side of it, on the SC, everything has to be at the latest and greatest if you're going to keep it at that. Any questions? I was trying to make sure that I didn't get any.
With one exception, everything below the 460 is optimized for 32-bit operating systems. So,
and then
a little gotcha I found out yesterday while I was converting the project.
And you guys have probably heard this from one of the previous ones that we talked about, but as of version 9 and specifically in version 10, they updated the utility so you no longer need the 32-bit version of Windows to do the upgrade if you're going from an older style FactoryTalk platform to a newer style. So for anybody that had to do that migration in the past and you went from like a version 5 and you wanted to bring it over to a 64-bit, you had to have the older file to run it through the conversion on that side of it, then bring it over to the 64-bit and run the conversion again. You no longer need to do that. You can take whatever application you had in the past, move it over to the new system without needing the 32-bit box. You just need the box. So that was upgraded in version 10, and they also did a patch upgrade to version 9. So, and we can send you the knowledge base article if anybody needs it. From a Rockwell support standpoint, we do have migration tools when it comes to either our older equipment or third-party equipment. So this kind of gives you a quick little list of the software conversion services. So that goes through our group. They can take it. We'll give you either a block of time or a fixed price on that migration side of it. We also have the ability of being able to use different adapters and different communication styles to be able to get that information in. So again, if it's not Ethernet IP, there's usually gateways or devices that we can do either natively or through what we call Encompass partners. And you guys have all met them, our ProSofts of the world, HMS, and a couple others. So, how many slicks? 503s and below? Okay. So the 4s and the 5s are easy. You guys might be aware of this guy that came out a little while ago. So this is our standard conversion utility. So what we do on the slick side of it is it was chassis based. You get a processor, a bunch of communication cards, and your I/O. And in most cases, you had multiple chassis in the system. So what you would do is the conversion for that is you would typically do that in Ars Logix 500, which is fun. And now we move everything over to the Studio 5000. So the pairing that we would do is compact Logix. So we do a compact Logix controller on the top end and own all of the existing I/O without you having to change the wiring. The only caveat there is any communication cards that weren't the Ethernet side of it, we now ignore it and move it to the compact Logix side. So what this does is it replaces the processor. So we essentially rip out the SLIC processor. In most cases, this would be either the remote I/O style or even the Ethernet style, it doesn't matter. We pop that out, we remove any communication cards. So if you had like another control net or device net scanner, we remove that. And now that gets replaced. So the entire rack of I/O is now owned by the compact Logix card. So in Studio 5000, there is a update utility that takes it from the old Ars Logix 500 code to the Studio 5000. And again, it doesn't optimize it for you. So if it took 10 lines of code before, it's still going to take 10 lines of code. So that if there's any usage there where you want to do some optimization, that's usually the time you can do it up front and do that without having to touch the system. But once you get that, all the I/O there is done for you. The requirement here is you have to be at least at version 21, or there is a version 20, but it got updated in 21 just to be able to add more modules. So it is a quick utility. This, I don't remember the list price, but it's for a full system, you're looking at about less than $6,000 list price for the compact Logix head and the adapter. And you leave your existing systems as is. So when Joe was talking about, if you're doing a new system, does it make sense to still buy a SLIC 505? Or does it maybe make sense to add a compact Logix head and own the rest of the system that was there?
This is pretty easy to guesstimate for, I know you, Andrews, you need a budget for all this stuff. This makes it easier to budget because you know the basic controller, the AENTR, and the basic controller like the L18 really is about $5,000 combined. So that then you can always guess on your rows of code and slap some engineering time down to it. Because the conversion utility is not going to take you all the way there. You're still going to be messing with timers and some other things. But you can say yes for $10,000, $15,000, we can do a migration for it. At least you have a number to put in your budget that's realistic.
The big caveat to look at the drawing, it essentially like lays out how you would do this. Anything that was an older style DH+, if we can, we'll migrate that over to Ethernet. So all your panel views, anything that you're doing there is going to be now Ethernet IP based. This is all running now on Studio 5000, so it's the environment that you lead up to. On the compact Logix side, we can be at version 20, and we can also go all the way up to 31. So it depends on what you want to do there. This is showing a 1-to-1, but like you guys have seen with PLC5, SLICs, and everything else, those processors that we had 20 years ago, what we can do now with a standard compact Logix is just a little bit of a difference. So the chances are that you would not need one processor for every single chassis of either PLC5 or SLIC that you would do a migration for. So this could potentially be one system, and it doesn't necessarily have to be compact logics. If you wanted to run everything on a control logics, there's nothing to stop you. So because it's the same development environment.
So in case if you don't want to change Ethernet, we still want to keep it to PH classes and support that?
So what we would do is, and we got a couple of slides later that talk about some of the options that we have. We do have solutions both from control logics or from a compact logics. We would do like a DIN option to keep communication for DH plus or remote IO and do Ethernet on top. So what we try to do is anytime we have legacy communication is keep it so that you can keep it as a phased approach, but improve the infrastructure so that now Ethernet backbone. So we have a couple of different solutions that allow you to do Ethernet up front, and then you can still tie in just like same idea as we would do with like serial. So you can still support that, but now everything's Ethernet based on top.
Just why would you be keeping the DH plus?
Because in one of my projects, the customer wasn't really sure to change the panel beam.
Oh,
So they wanted to change the PLC and the RIOs, but they wanted to keep the panel beam. And that communicated on serial DH plus or something.
yeah.
But that's why I was just asking that if I'm going for this route, would I be able to install? And secondly, they were not comfortable installing anything on the gateway. They wanted something on the chassis. So with control logics, I know we got a solution, we have a case plus card. But what about the compact logics?
That one does have an onboard.
I don't know if that compact or the DH plus card for the compact logics.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Just because a lot of times it's something, usually what's driving that, I sort of guess what you're doing. It's either an HMI that's running some strange protocol, or the whole fact is they don't want to pull the media out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we'd say, well, ProSoft makes a DH blue hose to Ethernet gateway. We would throw that in there.
But they were not really comfortable even installing anything on the gateway. So that ProSoft thing will be installed on the gateway.
Yeah, and the other gateway solution, because ProSoft does have a DH plus RIO to Ethernet gateway, not in chassis.
And then in situations like that, so they're checking, but I think Joe's right. I don't think we have anything that goes in chassis for DH plus on compact logics. The new ASCII module that I said, so it's ASCII, it'll be DF1, and then it's also Modbus RTU, but it won't do the blue host. So what we would do in those instances is just because the infrastructure might be compact logics, it doesn't necessarily say that you can't do a little 4-slot control logics with nothing but an adapter and your
DH plus card.
So
yeah, we've done that before.
we may have to go that route in instances where the customers say, okay, the requirement here is you cannot use anything that's this, or that. Granted, I'll probably have some words for them and try to convince them otherwise, but in instances like that, we are able to get around it where the same idea is the L7 to the L8 platforms. Just because I say that we can't support redundancy on the L8 doesn't mean that we can't use an L8 infrastructure built around an L7 control logics from the family. So we can still do redundancy there, but have one aspect where it's an L8 with new IO. So we're able to mix and match with these type of networks. So that might be an option.
There's not
No. Yes. So one of the things that comes up with this is, so life cycle that we talked about with the slicks, everything is now active mature. So a couple of years ago, we were talking about like the RoHS compliance and things of that nature. So all of the slick family got a refresh. So which is why we're able to continue it past 2017. What we did start doing is we are seeing some obsolescence when it comes to the IO cards and the communication. So whenever you are looking at like keeping your slick long-term, when we're doing this solution, all of the IO stays. So if there's anything that we need to look at from either communication or IO, where that specific IO might be going end of life soon, what we're starting to do is look at it where maybe it might make more sense to just do a full rip and replace. So those are the conversations that we can have. The other option that we're looking at at Automation Fair, we'll see information on a slick migration kit. So what this is going to do is it's going to be a conversion wiring harness, so similar to like the 1492, the IFMs. We're going to have a wiring solution that'll take you from a slick family directly into the 5380 processor family. So from a compact logics and the 5069 IO, there's, instead of that little terminal block that's on the front of it, it's going to be a full wiring harness tied in. So now you can go directly, again, you're going to remove the processor because now the processors are going to be compact logics. So at Automation Fair, they'll show it off so that you can see it in sometime in 2019, and I can't give you a date because we don't actually have that yet. We'll start seeing that come out. I'm assuming it's probably going to be mid-2019 calendar year. But at Automation Fair in November in Philly, they will talk about it, meaning that we'll have information that we can share with you around that time as well. I won't even ask how many PLC 5s there are. So PLC 5s have gone end of life, are discontinued. So the chances of you buying anything new, you have to go to eBay, and we don't want you doing that. So like Mike said, if you do have any of the older hardware, more than likely we can have that exchanged. So if there's any issues there, we can do that as long as we have the parts. One of the solutions that we have is instead of ripping out all of your system and redesigning it or redoing the wiring on it, we have a conversion chassis. So how many of you guys have seen the conversion chassis from us in the past? How many of you have seen the video that I'm going to show you in about 5 minutes? So what that gets us is the ability of being able to stick this into IAB, so Integrated Architect Builder. There's a wizard for the 1771. So it takes the PLC5 and BOM, power supply, processor, and all of the IO, and moves that into a 1756 control logics chassis. And what that does is it gives you a one-to-one, and any differences that it finds where it might be an 8-point card on the PLC5, but it's a 16-point card on the actual control logics. It asks you if there's multiple modules or do you want to leave it in the same way. The idea is after this, it gives you a bill of material with all of the parts that you need, including the cables. So once that's done, you turn it around to us, we give you a quote, you now have the full system. It's the same bolt hole pattern. So you're actually removing the entire PLC5 chassis, IO cards, everything. The only thing that stays is the little field wiring cable. So if you guys remember, there's that little adapter bar there that has all the wiring. You actually pull that off and you plug it into the new system. So ideally, the whole point is you don't touch the field IO wire. So if you had pictures like the first ones that Joe showed and you don't know where any of them go, maybe it's time to do an upgrade and do a redesign. But if for any reason you can't touch the system or you don't trust it, but you know it works, this is kind of the way to go. We have a lot of manuals. You've heard me say multiple times that Rockwell will bury you in documentation, and that is true in this aspect as well. So what we do here is we provide you the information, we give you all of the references. If you do it through IAB, it will provide you all the drawings when it comes to that 1492 wiring harness. So all of that information is there as far as the crossing. There's some publications that have been out for a while. Some of you have seen this video. Essentially what we're doing here is that's the existing PLC5 chassis. What we do is replace it. So you take the entire thing off, and at that point, all you're left with is a whole pattern that goes there. You replace that with the new chassis that we provide you. And the chassis size will be dependent on the chassis size that you had for 1771. So if the PLC5 was a certain size, we will give you the same size and one size bigger in case you wanted to go larger on the control logic. So if it was a 4-slot, you have an option of doing a 4-slot or a 7-slot from the actual control logics chassis, but the actual backplane side of it stays the same. So that would be your existing wiring that just goes back into it, same whole pattern, and you now have a little adapter plate that goes on top of it. So that protects it. The chassis sits on top. That's your standard control logics chassis. You have the option of either replacing the processor or just making it a remote IO adapter, so Ethernet IP. That wiring harness now goes in and ties into the existing wiring that you had to new I/O. So within an average of 6 to 7 minutes, you're able to like pull that out, pop the new one in there, and you now have a working system. The beauty of it is you didn't destroy the old stuff. So if you ran into an issue and you did oops, you now put it back to how it was. So that gives you the ability, and you got a little bit of flexibility. So you now have the ability of being able to do phased. Like I said, you can replace the processor with a new control logic processor. You can make it remote I/O. You can add new cards, so if you wanted to go a little bit bigger. The only thing that you have to be concerned about is the size. So width-wise, it's about the exact same thing, maybe a couple inches to the left when it comes to the power supply. If you go to the larger size control logic, so if you go from 4 to 7, obviously it's going to be a little bit wider. So you got to be aware of that. On the depth side of it, you're adding about 2 to 3 inches to the panel depth. So if you're able to support that, that's not an issue. Don't worry about it. The standard cable that comes with it is 1/2 meter. So if you need anything longer than that, and the only reason you would do that is when you replace the PLC5 or the chassis on top, you're able to pull out the control logics chassis and kind of sit it down. But depending on where you have it in the panel, you can't just go over, because that would be a bad thing. So if you got a table, if you got something set up there, usually whenever they have to do maintenance on the existing wiring, they'll take that out, put it on a panel, or put it on a hook further up. If you need anything longer than that, by default, it's a 0.5 cable, which is 1/2 meter. You can get that on longer distances. So it's just a customized cable, same thing that we use for the IFMs.
The big takeaway from this is Luis said you can convert a PLC5 in 6 to 7 minutes. So that's all you need to remember. He said it.
I didn't say it would work after that.
Comment on the side is if you have a P7 at the end of the 1771, it's pretty much about the same.
Mhm.
If you have an internal power supply, it's not.
Sure.
You may not have enough space for one big enough to drive.
Mhm.
You need to double check the measurement.
Yeah.
Just finish the start server.
And when you do the IAB report, it will give you the dimensions. So that'd probably be the first way that you guys can test it. So anything that you put in there, and it'll count for where the power supplies are. So it'll ask you that question. So if you don't know, or if you're just looking at a budgetary, you can just fill out normally. But once we get down to the nitty gritty, we'll want the actual part number so we can double check it.
And the other thing that's important on that, talking about dimensions, is going to be the depth of the cabinet, because it'll also stake it out a little bit further than the PLC5 did.
You had to finagle the swing arms, we're taking off rolls and get them around, get them on the wheel a couple of times, they were a little too tight. That's another one to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Depending on where you mount it, you move around a bit.
So I think the largest install that we've done is plus 50 units around the area. So overall, we've probably been 400 to 500 different installs that we've done now with this system. And it's always a 50-50. It either makes sense to do the conversion because everything's kind of the way it is, they got enough space, and they're doing it as a phased approach. But again, if you don't have the wiring drawings, if you haven't touched the system in years, and none of the code has been optimized, in most cases, it's probably worth just doing a redo. As far as the code conversion, this is going to be very similar to the way that we do for the slick. We bring it into the system. All you need is the application and Studio 5000. So once you have Studio 5000, it'll ask you to start bringing in the files. It tells you what controller you want to bring that into. So again, you have the option to go down to at least the version 20. If it's a newer system, we'll probably bring you up to 31. It just kind of depends, but you have the option, and it's dependent on what version you have installed on your box. So don't try to install version 21 if all you have is version 20. It'll ask you if you want to create aliasing for any of the actual codes. The older system was register-based, the newer system is all tag-based. So it will bring it over and give you the tag naming structure that you had for the N7 stuff. But now it'll be easier and you can do aliasing, you can make changes as you see fit. Once everything's brought over, it'll give you a new file, you bring that into the system. and then it gives you the verification side of it. It will document anything that you need to verify. So the timing, like Mike mentioned, that's the biggest thing. On a PLC5 side of it, you were looking at it where you can do a second, you can do milliseconds. In Control Logic's world, everything is milliseconds. So it will do it to the best of its ability, but it'll give you a little documentation strip on there saying, please make sure to test this piece of code. And the other thing that you have to be aware of is the asynchronous versus synchronous when it came on. You're now talking about Control Logics, which is a much faster system, and your RPI times can be down to like 12 milliseconds or faster. So if you had something where it would just scan at the end of the code and then come back, all of a sudden you might get a couple of relays that are doing this. So those are a couple of things that you need to check when you're doing the migration of the code. And also, if anybody doesn't know, anytime you install Studio 5000, there's at least 20 or 30 applications that get installed that are in the sample folder. There is a PLC5 migration example there. There's a slick one, there's a PLC5, all of those are available. You just go in there and go into open, and it'll give you all the documentation that goes with it. So that's the utility, all of the conversion kits. Like I said, if there's anything you need from a documentation standpoint, everything is very heavily documented on how we can go about going from an older system to a newer system.
I just have a quick question on here. So I came across a situation where we were migrating the high-speed counter module from 1771 to Control Logic 1756. So I was just reviewing the documentation from Rockwell, and I do not remember exactly the module name, but it happened to be exactly migrating it to IE16. Okay, but when I went into more details, so the span it takes from on to off wasn't really what I was looking for, because those high-speed counter modules were slightly, I would say, faster than that Control Logic. But when I went into more detail, because there's a high-speed counter module in Control Logic, it was like IE16F or something like that. I don't remember it. But I wasn't able to figure out the wiring in the manual. And at the same time, because it was like exactly saying that if you have this module, you gotta use this one. But that wasn't like fulfilling my requirements.
So
I was lucky enough that I got help from Rockwell at that moment, but
I think it was me and Joe. So yeah, so the wiring solution from the 1492, when you do it, it does have some associations on what cards go with what. So if you do, it was the IQ module, right?
Yeah.
So the 1771 has like an IQ module with an 8-point card. In the 1756 world for Control Logics, it was pairing it with just the analog card, which was a 16-point card. So it was a two-step process. One, if you had two of those, then it brings over two cables and ties into one IO card. So that's the part that I was saying, where it will ask you questions on what your system used to look like and what your system looks like now to try to optimize the cabling structure and things of that nature. It also makes assumptions on what card you're going to. In terms of the high speed versus the non, the only way to find out, and the way that we were kind of able to look at it, is if you go into the technical IO wiring from the standard analog module to the high speed module, it's the exact same thing out. Internally, the communication might be different. Internally, the way that you do the add-on profile would be different, but the actual wiring harness is the exact same thing. So from a wiring harness point of view, as long as the pinout is the same, it's a don't care from the card. So, but it is true that from a documentation side of it, it will not account for every single IO card that we have, which in the Control Logics world, we have about 128 different patterns. So there are a couple of them that aren't there, but the main thing to look at is the pinout. So if it's a 32 point and all the wiring is kind of going in the same spot, it's the exact same thing. You just have to take the onus on the programming side to make sure that it's making that addressing. Because when you do the program change, you have to assign it to the specific card that you're looking at.
yeah, because that conversion wasn't really able to assign the high speed component.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the automated conversion, it's not going to do that. You
Correct.
have to manually do it.
Yes.
That's what we did eventually.
Yeah, a high speed, there's certain things like that, encoder, specific encoder, that's a high speed pulse you're talking about.
Mhm.
Those you take off the table and you figure you're gonna have to do this by hand anyway.
And then you run into the issue sometimes where you don't, it's been so long that you don't know whether it's differential or single mode. 'Cause I know that came up also. So one of the things to look at there is if you buy something from us and you don't break the package, you can return it. So if it's issues like that, as long as you don't break the box and break the seal, like we'll be able to replace it. So if you find out after the fact it's differential, but you bought the single-ended, the only reason that's important is some of the conversion chassis, because of the fact that you're not actually wiring the middle portion of it, you're taking exactly how it was wired before and tying it into the card, exactly how that cable is designed. And unless you want to break open the cable and rewire everything, which I wouldn't recommend, you buy it for either the single mode or the differential. So if you run into any of those issues or anything, just don't break the seal. You can buy the later one after the fact or buy both and just return the one that you don't need, that type of thing. One thing that we do have is we have the ability to do it for you. In most cases, this is for a simpler system, but from either an SI, OEM, end user. If you guys just want us to kind of take the brunt of it and take the application and move that over, we can do this, but it's usually on a smaller scale system. So less than 1,000 rungs and a couple other limitations out of it. We can do all of it normally, but we provide you a part number and you just get that quoted as a flat rate. We can do that and just talk to any of us and we'll be able to do that.
Slide it.
Oh, yeah, there we go. So these are a couple of things that we look at. So less than 1,000 rungs when we're looking at less than 5,000 tags. And then if we're going directly to compact logics, we're not doing redundancy. It's not a safety system. If we need to do any of the other stuff, then it'd be an engineered solution, and normally we can do that anyway. So
There's an actual checklist that covers what it takes to be able to do this type of conversion. But one nice thing is these part numbers are actually loaded in Rockwell's proposal works. So this is the engineering and hardware conversion. Again, if you need budgetary numbers, this is something you refer back to. You don't even have to talk to a Reynolds or Rockwell salesperson. If you know this sort of fits the bill, it gives you numbers you can work with, so you can put them into your budgets for 2019.
and as you can see, it doesn't force you into an Ethernet-based system. You can still do it as the DH Plus. From a control logic standpoint, we do have that in chassis.
Yeah, this is not something we're saying this will work 90% of the time, because it's not going to. But it's nice having, because if you need a quick reference, well, how much is it going to take to make the conversion? We have a place we can start having.
So any DCSs in the room that aren't ours? So I won't spend too much time on this. So you guys know that we have Plant PX, which is our DCS. Because it's control logics based, the same way that we treat all of the other communication styles, we have solutions around other people's DCS to bring them into our system. So whether it's a Siemens, a Delta V, Honeywell, we can have that communication brought in, have control logics as the main kind of processor on the top end. And that could either be treated as a DCS as part of Plant PX, or we can just do it standalone as part of maybe the balance of plant or anything that might be in those systems. So Honeywell, if you have the C200, it's essentially control logics anyway, so we can easily migrate that over. But when we start looking at the other guys here, we have both from an OPC server capability, the database conversion, so taking their existing database and moving it into both control logics and factory talk, which would be the top end side of it there. The custom cabling is the same idea that we're sharing with the SLICs and the PLC5s. Those will be able to kind of convert and grab directly from their IO cards and bring it into our IO card. And then when you start seeing here, the scanner module is the one that has less solutions on there. That's if we're actually jumping onto, let's say, Honeywell's UCN network. We have a conversion card that goes directly into the control logics, and instead of Ethernet IP, we're talking their UCN. So we can leave a lot of their existing equipment there and just own the top end and do a phased migration approach. So we have more details on a lot of this stuff, but just a couple of things to kind of show how that would work. Is that's the Foxborough IA cable. We'll take that existing and just tie it in directly into our DC input card. Honeywell, the TDC, the majority, that's usually the biggest one that we see here in the market. Same thing, big, gigantic green board, big, gigantic serial cable, just plug it in directly. So if you guys have any information that you want for this stuff, we do have presentation decks and a lot of information we can share. Usually this type of information is shared a lot at our PSUG event. So every year, right before Automation Fair, they do the Process Solutions User Group. That's when they present these type of documents, or at TechEd. So for anybody that's either using our DCS from PlatPX or just using the process library in general, so a couple months ago, I talked about the newer iteration of it. So we have the Process Library 4.0 that has released. So if anybody needs it, let me know. I can send you a link, but it's on the product download compatibility website. Those are the AOIs, so like the P alarms or the P analogs, things of that nature. So you just drop those into the system. They work for control logics, compact logics, and you can use them both with the panel views for the 6 and the 7, or the HMI site for Factory Talk View SE. So we have what's called a library migration tool. So if you had an older system that was done in, let's say, library 2.0, 3.0, you can migrate that over and it does it automatically for you. Instead of just starting from scratch, it'll do the migration from an ACD file from an older system to a newer system. Now that at the end of July, we released the library objects inside of the tools and utility folder of the library. So if you download the library, if you go into the tools folder, you'll find the migration. This is part of the release notes. They'll tell you all the iterations that change, anything that updated, and it's an exe file that launches on your desktop. So it doesn't have to be run from a server. It can be run from your workstation. No license is required. All you need is the ACD file. So run that. It'll take versions all the way down to 1.1, migrate it over to 4. Every iteration of the library that comes out will have a migration tool utility on it so that you can always go from an older system to a newer system. Same thing like anything else. You can't go from a new system to an old system, but you can go from an old to a new. On the library, one of the caveats that I talked about is it requires Factory Talk View version 10 for the visualization side of it. It will work with Studio 5000 version 18 and above. So if you're using Factory Talk View version 9, you'll still be on like 3.5 on the library. All of that is still supported. You can go to the download site and get whatever version is still applicable. I think down to 2.10. So this is kind of where everything ties in. So you said you counted all 94? You got to give Brian credit. So we don't have a slide for this, so we didn't actually know how many new objects came in. So Brian had to count them all. So new library objects, you can use it for anything regarding process. So it doesn't matter if it's not a DCS, if you guys are wanting to go in there, everything is still open. All of the applications are there. There is a sample folder inside of it, so you can use that. That's the same demo that I was kind of presenting, but now it's complete. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, communications migrations. Basically, if you're using a Bluehost or a proprietary network, we're telling you get off of it. We want everything. What's that?
We say it nicely, but.
No, it's time to get rid of Bluehost, please. Mainly because all the people who know how to support it, they're not with us anymore. And the only thing I'd say, if your Bluehost network doesn't work, you're missing a resistor. I find that's the answer 90% of the time. So, and that's why I'm the network specialist here. So on DH45, I know we're running tight on time. Our PLC5 answer for everything when doing a conversion is this ProSoft box. It's our DH data highway remote IO box. So when we're trying to migrate a PLC5, especially doing it slowly in pieces, This box will allow you to migrate your HMI, your IO platform, so you can move it over little by little. And the nice thing about it, as you do the conversion, you can move this gateway over to another project. Is usually there's more. If you have one PLC5, you've got 20 of them. So it helps you do your migrations in an orderly fashion. Price on these, I don't know what, list price $2,500, I don't know. Haven't had any familiar issues with them or people complaining. I haven't personally done the set one up before, but people I do who know have done it say there's no issue at all. It sets up easier than a ProSoft in chassis Modbus card. So. Now, other things, people who have used a lot of slicks and micrologics probably cried a lot when the net AIC and the net ENI were discontinued a couple of years ago. I never thought about it until all of a sudden I started having lots of people having emergencies. They have been replaced. Real-time automation, not an Encompass partner, but someone gave them the credit for it anyway. It's just a gateway company we like a lot for certain applications. They make all sorts of converters. If you need a USB to Ethernet gateway, they have one. But they did make a straight replacement for the 1761 net ENI and the net AIC. Actually work better than the originals. So I can highly recommend them, and a lot less expensive than what a net ENI is going for on the gray market right now. We can try to buy one. So I really wanted to promote that, but we have filled that hole that was out there. This is just our migration recap. Now, we're going to make the slide deck available to you. And as Joe said, there's no one, for most part, there's not one direct direction to migrate to. This is a pretty good platform. It shows you where we're trying to go with it. Our rule of thumb is slicks generally go to compact logics. PLC5 is generally to control logics, mainly because there's the conversion utilities. Then our micrologics right now, we're sort of in between going to compact logics or going to the micro 800s. But this eye chart is available for you. Easy to read. And since we've already covered this, we're going to just pass by and thank you.
So one of the things to look at is if you do have older communication styles, we can still support it. None of that has gone end of life for us when it comes to tech support. So, but from a implementation style, everything that we're trying to do is moving you over to Ethernet IP. And at this point, I probably said that multiple times, but what we're doing there is just keep in mind that we can still do phased migrations. And in most cases, what we would do with any type of system that you have that either is a SLIC, a PLC5, is we would replace the top end controller with the latest and greatest. We can still leave all of the existing and now own it with a newer system. And as you see fit, you can now replace the older system. And again, that could be a phased over a couple months, it can be a couple years. God, please don't make it a couple years. But to Mike's point earlier is if you need budget cycle information, the PLC5 is end of life. There's a lot of pieces that we're now starting to see where the kind of migration is going to be towards. So let us know what the system looks like. We can give you a budgetary on what the product will be or what the parts are. And if there's any conversion utilities or anything that we have available, we'll let you know about it. And at least you can use that and start tacking it to people's wall and say, okay, by this date or next year, we need this. A lot of the times what you'll end up seeing is a replacement for a PLC5 or a SLIC and things of that nature. Hails in comparison to what you can do with just the standard compact or control logics nowadays. No, we don't need to do like for like anymore. And in a lot of cases in the communication side of it, just because it's not on board or a native Rockwell product, we have a lot of Encompass partners that are now getting into the space and making up for those gaps. Whether it's Molex, ProSoft, Spectrum, there's cards all over the place. So down to a .io level, and now the 5380 family is starting to get third-party support. So we'll probably see a lot more kind of come into fruition at Automation Fair. on what we can do with those different platforms. So just let us know.
Oh, one quick question, since I covered all three sides of communications. The Stratix 8000, if you have used any of those switches, they are going away. Now, what was special about the Stratix 8000 was it was sort of a modular design. It was a huge modular design. It's an older switch, that's why it was so big. The replacement for that is the 5700. 5700 is not modular, but it does go up to 20 ports. So where we're going is we're never going to leave with a Stratix 8000. And if you call us and you want one, we're going to push you another direction to either a 5700, or if anyone ever used the Stratix 8300, that was a layer 3 version of the 8000. We'll push you towards a Stratix 5400. Rockwell will have a higher port count modular in panel switch. Probably going to be seeing maybe at Automation Fair this year.
Potentially.
So
Yeah, so if anything requires on the modular side, we'll look at it. But the 5700 and 5400 switch, it's the same iOS, just with more capabilities.
actually, it's a more enhanced iOS.
So in most cases, to Mike's point, if you guys brought us anything that you wanted to look at the network side, we would not start with the Stratix 8000 as of right now, or the 8300. But if you do have installations on there, we're not getting rid of support. It's just we are moving it over to end of life, and it'll probably be about 18 to 2 years. And then that'll be discontinued as the rest of the products.